Over the last few days, I have been thinking about this Apple Intelligence stuff, in particular the Siri stuff, the stuff happening on your phone. Been thinking about it a lot, but of course, since I'm not an Apple guy, I'm not an iPhone guy, I am if anything, I'm a Pixel guy, an Android guy more broadly. I've been thinking about this stuff within the broader context of Google and competition with Google, how what they're doing compares to what Google is doing. And I think that there's a lot to unpack when it comes to this stuff. And I want to start by looking at this article from all the way back in December of 2023. And yes, I've talked about this specific article a couple of times. I'm going to talk about it again. It's something that kind of has not necessarily gone like swept under the rug, but just something that hasn't had a lot of attention paid to it. And I think that it's important, and it's only going to get more important as we get closer and closer to fall when the Pixel 9 is to be launched. Google is apparently working on a thing called Pixie, a Pixie AI assistant for the Pixel 9. No, I do not think it will launch being called Pixie, just like Bard became Gemini. Pixie would be a terrible name. Pixie Pixel. It's too confusing. They're going to change the name of this thing. But what it is really, really important, especially now in light of what Apple just did with Apple Intelligence and the new revamped version of Siri. So if we scroll down here, they're referencing an article that is behind a paywall on a website called The Information. It is quoted as saying, Google is working on something powered by Gemini that will be, quote, an AI assistant called Pixie that will be exclusive to its Pixel devices. And this thing will apparently use Gmail, Maps, and other, quote, data from Google products on your phone to evolve into a far more personalized version of the Google Assistant. Does this sound familiar? I believe that it should. Going a little bit further, they say that it's going to be able to, quote, perform complex and multimodal tasks, such as suggesting directions to the closest store where someone can buy a product they have photographed. Again, does this sound familiar? I believe that it should. To me, this sounds very, very similar to what Apple is doing with Siri. We saw these sorts of examples where, the lady triggers Siri and says, when does my mother's flight arrive? It goes through her text messages and finds that information. Well, what did we just say that this thing's going to be able to do? It's going to be able to access Gmail, Maps, and other data from Google products. Can we assume that Google Messages will be included in it as a Google product? I think that is definitely a strong possibility. And I think that falls right in line with this complex and multimodal task idea, suggesting directions to the closest store where someone can buy a product they have photographed. That is exactly the kind of stuff that we were talking about. So what I think is going to happen is that when the Pixel 9 comes out, I think that they're going to have an upgraded version of Google Assistant or an upgraded version of Gemini, whatever they're going to call it, that is going to be able to perform very likely on device. We already see Gemini Nano doing things on the Pixel 8. I think that this is going to be taken, obviously, much more, or much further, I should say, with the Pixel 9, as it does have the newer version of the Tensor processor. And while I don't think that all of this stuff is going to happen on device, I do think you're going to see a shift towards even more of it being done on device and in, as they're saying here, a much more personal way. And you can probably see for yourself how these two things sound extraordinarily similar. Now, of course, this has not been, like I said, something that's been broadly rumored and dug into and all sorts of things pulled out. We've got, photos of the Pixel 9, but this has not been talked about a whole lot. It's been kept a whole lot more under wraps if it's real. Now, there is a chance that this is just total nonsense and it's not real at all. But I think that there is a pretty strong chance that Google is indeed working on something like this. We saw them kind of talk a little bit about these sorts of things at Google I/O. It was in a fairly brief portion of this year's Google I/O, but Sundar Pichai was actually on stage and showed off something they're calling AI agents. And in this brief demo, they show using Gemini to take a picture of a pair of shoes. They tell Gemini they're too small or they're too big, whatever, I need to return them. It searches through their Gmail inbox, finds the order, fills out a return form through the website, and then gives them information of where and how to sort of drop these shoes off to return them. So again, Even though we've not seen this broadly talked about, we haven't seen major leaks on this, I do think it's a pretty strong, or there's a pretty strong chance this kind of thing is absolutely coming. So now obviously we're trying to sort of read the tea leaves here. We're taking what Apple is saying they are doing and we're comparing it to rumors about what Google is doing and some stuff that they said on stage and sort of piecing together this story. We're going to do that though in one more place because we have another area where Apple is telling us what they're doing and then we have Google's track record. We need to talk about your data, privacy, security, and all of that stuff. Now, I talked about this briefly in my initial sort of reaction video to Siri, and as time has gone on, more things have been said, and there's a whole lot more to say, and I think that it's definitely worth tearing into. So we're going to look at a post on Apple.com, their newsroom. But basically how this works is if you're using Siri and you ask it some question about your mom's flight information, that processing is done on your device. It's going to look through your messages, your emails, whatever. It's going to find that bit of information and then present it to you. Again, this is done on device. There should be no reason why this would ever leave your device, and especially no reason why it would ever be stored anywhere. Google says that stuff does not happen. Now, if you ask it something that does require a little bit more processing power, it will offload it to a server. However, Apple says this is something called private cloud compute, uses your data only to fulfill your request, never stores it, making sure it's never accessible to anyone, including Apple. It's encrypted, it's temporary, it's deleted after the query is completed. Now, if your on-device processing fails you and private cloud compute fails you, it will prompt you to say, do you want ChatGPT to answer this question? At that point, things do change just a little bit. But even still, Apple says that they're taking steps to make sure that your data is private and secure. They say that regarding ChatGPT use, privacy protections are built in for users who access ChatGPT. Their IP addresses are obscured and OpenAI won't store requests. Now look, Google talked a lot at I.O. about how they were working to have things processed on your phone. They used the word private, secure a whole bunch of times. But we all know what Google's reputation is. They are a very different company than Apple. And a lot of their money is made on the backs of our data. Their AIs are being trained on the backs of our data. Their ad revenue. How do they know what ad to show you? Well, that would be through the collection of our data. Again, these are very different companies. So to me, a place where Apple has a really big lead is with the stuff I just talked about. The steps that they have taken and how forthright and upfront they've been with these things is really, really substantial. We've not seen anything quite like this from Microsoft or Google. We've not seen them sort of creating their own private cloud compute thing where nothing's being stored. In fact, it's genuinely hard to imagine Google or Microsoft doing something like that. Again, just because of their reputation and how they have used our data in the past. How big of a piece of their business model this data collection and analysis is and will continue to be. And yes, they are saying all the right things, right? Like all the right words are coming out of their mouth. They're putting all the right graphics on the screen. But I must admit to you that even though I'm not super precious about my own data, the idea that Google knows a lot of things about me, I'm like, I just don't really care. I'm not really bothered by that. I am beginning to grow tired of the feeling of almost feeling like I am a product and everyone is sort of coming after my data. And maybe sort of a contradictory claim. I don't really care that much about the data. I care about the feeling of everyone sort of predating on my data. That just is kind of a gross feeling that is beginning to build up and is beginning to feel a little bit uncomfortable to me. So for me, as we move on into the future, as Google releases the Pixel 9, and if we potentially do see something like what Siri is doing, fully accessing all the data on your phone, what I'm going to be watching for very, very, very closely is how Google handles this data privacy issue. I think right now we have, delivered by Apple, sort of a pretty high standard for how this should be done. What will Google do? How will it compare? How will it fall short? How will it surpass? That is going to be, for me, potentially the biggest question. But I do want to hear from you guys in the comments down below. Is this something you're thinking about? What do you think about all the things that I have just said. Guys, let me know in those comments. Subscribe for more content just like this. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.